The day I learned how my children were interpreting my behavior was a real light bulb moment for me. The wonderful Tony Robbins talks about something called sensory acuity, the awareness to realize how your behavior impacts on others. For instance, how many times have you been in a conversation with someone who's talking about, let's say, their wonderful holiday to Florida? They're walking you through it day by day in finite detail, completely oblivious to the fact that they're boring you to tears. There are times when our children will see us in ways that only serve to create hurt and frustration and sometimes even anger in them, when our intention as parents is to achieve the complete opposite. In fact, your child's reaction may leave you somewhat confused and feeling the same unhelpful emotions. So let's delve into how your child might perceive your behavior, as this exercise in self-awareness can really help to sidestep the friction caused by sending out messages that you genuinely didn't want to send. So before we begin, perhaps consider using the behavioral map you've created as a reminder of where everyone in the family currently sits, as we now begin to uncover some of what triggers your child and indeed anyone's emotions. We're going to walk through each of the primary gifts, but let's begin with a young person whose primary gift is to analyze. Firstly, how might they perceive the behavior of a parent who also shares similar blue analyzer traits? Well, they may be thinking, why do you keep quoting me more and more rules, even when they don't make sense and aren't relevant? But what about a parent who's predominantly a green supporter? The young analyzer may see them as far too emotional, inconsistent with routines, and unwilling to deal with potentially challenging issues head on. To the yellow innovator parent, now they may be seen by their logical, rational child as unstructured, unpredictable, and someone who doesn't abide by their own rules. And lastly, the red initiator parent. They might be seen as jumping to conclusions, constantly wanting to change things, and similarly to innovators, will bend or break the rules that they originally put into place for the family. Now here's the challenge. Regardless of whether you're actually behaving in any of the ways described, it is your child's perception of your behavior that counts. If the child's perception is strong enough, then as far as they're concerned, it's the reality. This is where adapting your behavior to create new perceptions for your child will help you break those misconceptions, something we're going to address. Now let's move on to a young person whose primary gift is to initiate. Not known for their high levels of patience, these fast-thinking, fast-acting people might see a blue analyzer parent as someone who reacts far too slowly and cautiously and will therefore give the impression that they're trying to slow the red initiator down, so much so that they ultimately restrict their actions. Whilst the green supporter parent may be seen as being too soft on others and not focused enough on getting things done quickly. The young initiator may also see them as burying their head in the sand, especially when it comes to dealing with challenging situations. Then there's the yellow innovator parent, who may be seen, in a nutshell, as someone that's hard to rely upon, especially when they try to influence or manipulate in order to get what they want. And lastly, the parent who also predominantly demonstrates red initiator behavior. In this case, the relationship friction fireworks may well begin to fly, as they might be seen as being impulsive, far too direct, and someone who just will not listen to anyone else's point of view. A young red initiator needs to feel as though they have a good degree of autonomy and control if they're fully to utilize their gifts. So anything that's believed to restrict their ability to act will always trigger an emotion. And so to our creative, enthusiastic, optimistic yellow innovators. Similarly to initiators, they love to move quickly, so anyone that slows them down is seen as placing barriers in their way. So when it comes to a parent who's more inclined to want to take a more reflective approach, then frustration in the young innovator will quickly begin to build. Therefore, they may see a blue analyzer parent as not being open to new ideas, making them appear rigid and inflexible and unappreciative of the innovator's different approach to life. Yellow innovators love to walk on the lighter side of life and will therefore see a green supporter parent as perhaps a little suffocating in their efforts in simply trying to support. They may also be seen as a little skeptical of the reasons behind the innovator's desire to want to influence others. Now, two innovators together can often lead to an atmosphere of mistrust and perceived misleading behavior. Therefore, both parties sometimes find it difficult to build mutual trust in their relationship. Innovators see red initiators as being so focused on getting things done that they're unaware of other people's feelings, and so dogmatic that they spend far too much time focusing on what the innovator sees, at least, as unimportant small issues. A young yellow innovator loves to be recognized as an ideas person, a free spirit who's constantly coming up with new ways of doing things. So anything that restricts them, for instance rigid rules or structured timetables, will trigger an emotion. And lastly, to our patient, sharing and caring green supporters. They like nothing more than spending time with people, so don't expect to ever have a quick chat when you bump into a supporter. Now, as you know, blue analyzers are focused on taking action rather than spending time discussing things. So a green supporter child whose parent is wired this way may perceive this type of behavior to demonstrate a lack of interest in them, possibly even uncaring, instead preferring to engage through rules and routines. Okay, now when two supporters get together, it can sometimes appear as though a who can be the most helpful person contest is taking place. So if a green supporter parent doesn't allow the child to get involved or help them, then the child begins to feel guilty because they're not doing what they're essentially wired to do. The child may also feel rejected because the parent is not providing the opportunity to exercise their natural supportive gifts. As yellow innovators see supporters as a little suffocating at times, in turn the supporter may see the innovator parent as frivolous, not taking anything seriously, and as is the common misconception, someone that can't always be relied upon and trusted. You'll remember we talked earlier about the possibility of more intense relationship friction between yellow innovators and blue analyzers, and between red initiators and green supporters. So there's no real surprise when a gifted supporter perceives their initiator parent as overbearing or unwilling to listen, never satisfied, thus leaving the child feeling inadequate. People often ask me, well, how on earth do I begin to make these adaptations? Well, whilst making compromises are what I'm sure you're very much used to doing, adapting your communication mindset is not something that comes naturally. It's not easy, especially if your child doesn't want to initially at least adapt with you. So expect developing acceptance and appreciation to be uncomfortable at first. That's natural. The good news is that once you take that leap and step outside of your comfort zone and persist with it, you'll start to experience positive change when previously you were hitting the proverbial relationship brick wall. So to help, here are just a few examples of some of the most common changes in behavior that lead to significantly enhanced relationships. But before we run through them, let's again remind ourselves of one thing. We all possess a unique behavioral DNA. So how we come across is unique to us, and of course is very much dependent on how others choose to perceive us. So I'm focusing, as I say here, on the most common behavioral patterns for each of the primary gifts. They may or may not apply to you, but when reflecting on them, please be honest with yourself, and also think about how others tend to react, both positively or otherwise, to you. So let's first take a look at those who are predominantly gifted as blue analyzers. They're sometimes perceived, fairly or not, as having too many rules, perhaps reacting too slowly, not always being open to new ideas, and are tied to too many routines. By stepping outside the comfort zone, a willingness develops to at least try to have less rules or demands, try and respond more quickly, especially when it comes to decision making, be open and responsive to new ideas, and perhaps be a little more flexible with routines and schedules. As a predominantly green supporter parent, you may be sometimes seen as being too emotional, perhaps too lenient, overbearing, albeit when all you're doing is showing you care and not allowing others to help. By embracing a more matter-of-fact approach, by setting clearer expectations, by providing more breathing space and allowing others to help you, you'll be perceived differently. especially if your child is a blue analyzer or a red initiator. But what if you're a yellow innovator like me? Well, here the common conception often surrounds unpredictability, primarily due to our love of variety or change. This has certainly led me to being seen as someone who lacks a certain sense of commitment, not something, by the way, I ever saw in myself. So for people wired like me, we need to consider adopting more consistent behavior, being clearer with the reasons behind what we do, therefore communicating in a clear, transparent manner, which in turn helps others build trust in us. And now to our initiators, who are often seen, especially by green supporters, as jumping to conclusions, not listening, not being aware of others' feelings, and seemingly never satisfied. As with all the other primary gifts, when red initiators behave in ways that might seem initially counterintuitive and certainly will feel uncomfortable, empowering results will ensue. Therefore, initiators will benefit from more readily considering other points of view, and perhaps consider the mantra given to us by Epictetus, who all those years ago said, "We are born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, therefore we should use them in that order." Be more aware of others' feelings. And lastly, value the value of acknowledging and praising, reassuring and comforting. Building stronger relationships are just like building stronger muscles. You start with light exercise and gradually build from there. With relationships, you start by making small adaptations in how you communicate and go from there. Look, sometimes it's painful. Sometimes you don't feel as though you're getting the results. But by going to the relationship gym regularly, and you'll excuse the pun, you'll begin to see things working out.